Winter, 2017, Riverdale, Georgia. Just a 25-minute drive from the city of Atlanta. It's a city filled with up-and-coming movers and shakers, all hoping to make it big. Just like 28-year-old Raheem Grant, a.k.a. Red Beasley.
Your boy Red Beasley, man, too cool.
He's a musician and a father who loves to live life in front of the camera, sharing his rise to stardom since he was a child.
My name is Geraldine Grant Bryson. I am Raheem Grant's mother, and I love him truly. Everywhere he went, everything he did, people knew him. You could go in the studio with him and you could come out with a whole album because he mixed and mastered and did everything.
Then one evening, on December 29th, 2017, Raheem's rise to the top
We went from losing to win.
comes to a sudden halt. And a rookie detective gets the most defining call of his young career.
In 2017, I was a detective with Clayton County Police Department, and my name is Joshua Teskey. The Criminal Investigation Division ended up getting a call to go investigate this homicide. I was thinking, this is going to be an easy call. And then I get there and I realize it's not that simple.
A&B marker, John Gossard's interview, take one.
My name's John Gossard, and in 2017, I was a senior investigator for the Clayton County District Attorney's Office. We have someone who called 911 and said that a woman had shown up with her baby at her front door, hysterically crying, and was bleeding from stab wounds from the leg.
The woman is Sierra Harp. The baby is 3-year-old Angel, whom she co-parents with Raheem Grant.
Sierra had multiple stab wounds all up and down her left leg, from the calf level to right below her buttocks. They were afraid that she was actually going to bleed out. They had to transport her into surgery right away.
While Sierra is rushed to the hospital, a neighbor tells officers to check out the upstairs apartment where Raheem Grant lives.
The responding officers end up seeing a blood trail leading from their apartment. They check the door and the door is unlocked.
Officers enter the apartment and are met with dead silence.
So they start walking into the door.
And that's when they saw
A fairly large amount of blood that was in the threshold of the apartment.
Lying around, waiting to die.
As officers start following the blood,
Never did quite satisfy.
it's leading further into the bathroom.
halfway between one of the bathrooms and a hallway leading into the bedroom. They found someone's body laying face down on the ground.
Based on the studio equipment in the next room, police realize the victim is Raheem Grant, son of devoted parents and father of Angel. He's the victim of a heartless attack that will surely devastate those that love him the most.
Tony Bryson, Raheem's dad. Raheem was everything that the kid next door was. He was kind, he was generous, he was mischievous. He was funny, he was witty.
I would put cartoons on for him, and he would like to go to the music party. He was always into music.
Raheem's parents proudly watched their son, flourishing father and musical prodigy, share his gifts with the world. Now, he's been rendered voiceless, lifeless, and they'll have to come to grips with the tragic news of his passing.
Someone called me. It was Clayton County Police Department. We need to talk to you about Raheem. And I was like, said to myself, what has Raheem done? Because I always think it was the music. I always too loud with music and stuff. He said, can you sit down? Then he said, well, we just called to let you know that Raheem was killed.
I mean, the worst thing that I think for a parent is to gotta bury your own child.
I was crushed. I was heartbroken. He was really gone.
We've all got dreams. But now, Raheem's have been cut short, and the time for sharing his passion has come to an end. But the person suffering the most is his baby girl, Angel. From the day she was born, if Raheem wasn't posting online, producing, composing, or writing lyrics, he was with Angel.
And it's like him, her hands. Then she do certain things, and it's like, wow. I look at her. I said, that's right, all day.
He would take pictures of her all the time, and on those phones, it was him and her all the time, just doing everything.
Did Raheem share too much? Did his openness lead to his tragic demise? And will Angel's mom, Sierra, whose life hangs in the balance, suffer the same fate? Back at the crime scene, and with no one else to speak to about the murder, detectives will have to rely on clues left behind at Raheem's apartment. Is this grisly scene the result of an intruder, or a robbery gone wrong?
Door wasn't kicked in. It did not appear that a home invasion had taken place. So told me that whoever committed this shooting had free access to the apartment. Raheem Grant was very active in the Atlanta rap community. He was very successful, was just about to embark on the next chapter of his career. Could it be a jealous person from their career? Absolutely could have been.
Is it possible that a deranged fan or even an industry rival took things too far? Right now, Sierra is the only person who can answer questions about that fateful night. But her life is in limbo.
She's traumatized, and she's going to need some type of help.
Then, once Sierra wakes up, and she identifies the trigger man, her story reveals a shocking truth.
Y'all see this?
That will bring the city of Atlanta to its knees.
Who was going to get justice for Raheem?
It's been 2 hours since Raheem Grant was found dead in his apartment. His rise to fame? Shattered. His passion as a father? Cut off. His love of recording his life out loud? Gone forever.
She's at his side with a long damn.
And the mother of his daughter, Sierra Harp, clings to life in the hospital.
The issue is that we're trying to figure out what happened right here, right now, and we can't because we can't talk to her.
At the same time, word of Raheem's sudden passing hits the news desk.
My name is Audrey Washington, and I am a television news reporter for WSB TV here in Atlanta, Georgia. So I got a call from my producer. She said, listen, there's a murder that happened in Clayton County. Sierra was bleeding profusely. She had just survived this brutal attack. When the police arrived, they could not even understand what she was saying.
What we have to do is talk to the person that was there, somebody that had eyes inside the apartment to tell us what happened. The only people that would have known would have been Sierra, and Sierra, she's sedated at this point, so we can't talk to her. And then the other option, of course, is trying to talk to 3-year-old Angel. We end up trying to set up a forensic interview with Angel. She can talk, but she's very shy. So she didn't feel comfortable in that situation.
This little girl lost her father and her mother. She's in the hospital, struggling to survive.
Back in 2013, long before Angel was born, Raheem and Sierra shared more than just dreams of a bright future.
Raheem met Sierra Hart, and she wanted to do some promotion for him. And she was a very, very nice person, got very close to her.
But Sierra's life didn't always dish out sweet Georgia peaches.
She had told me that she had rough bringing up with her family. And she was just trying to get into getting her life better. And I was willing to help her, and Raheem was too. I treated her like a daughter. I really liked Sierra.
Within a few months of working together, Raheem and Sierra got even closer behind the scenes. And Angel was born. Sierra was really drawn to Raheem. With his magnetic personality and talent, Raheem was desired by studio execs too.
I'm Rafael Capone, the owner of the Soul Asylum Studios group.
I got codeine, this was bright. Slow up. I've been smoking weed all night.
This is 2013 Red Beezy, song called Oh Well, recorded in the Platinum Suite. Raheem came to us back when I was engineering. Really great guy.
Turned up so goddamn hard.
He would write the hook. He produced the beat. But he was very talented.
Boy, Beezy.
He was just lit in a sense, always live.
They got out the same game, Facebook same game.
Come on. I'll bet y'all know what it is. Beezy.
Raheem was at that cuff of making it, you know, the paid shows, the features. You can check his social media. He would come to the studio with so much energy, and you could tell it's something he really wanted to do.
Just got my major deal.
And then his life taken.
Oh, hey man, y'all know what it is.
Like everyone else, Raheem shared his life on social media. But instead of analyzing algorithms, detectives must look to the evidence if they want to understand what led up to his death. And that evidence tells a heartbreaking story about Raheem's final moments.
I could observe multiple wounds. I saw one or two in his back and one in the top of his head.
While detectives bag up Raheem's cell phone, gun casings, the knife, and all other evidence, responding officers also collect evidence from his neighbor's apartment. One of these items could point to his killer.
The neighbor turned over a gun at the time. She said that Sierra had a gun, and when she arrived at the door, it made me ask questions.
Is this the gun that was used to murder Raheem? Where did it come from? Did the attacker bring it with them, or was it already in the apartment? Police run the serial number and get a hit.
We knew that the gun was Raheem's gun. There was a holster on top of the refrigerator, and we knew that's where the gun was retrieved from.
What they don't know is why the gun was in Sierra's hand. Did the same person who stabbed Sierra fire the gun and shoot Raheem? Or did Sierra use it to scare off the attacker? Now out of surgery, doctors are confident Sierra will survive. But the recovery process is only just beginning.
Anytime that somebody goes through a traumatic experience, it's going to take them a couple of days just to kind of build back that memory and actually piece together what it is that happened.
So after everything, it took like 4 days. I hadn't seen him. He got murdered on that Friday, and I didn't see him anymore Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. It was like Tuesday. I had to go to a funeral home to go and get him and picked him up. And that's when I got a chance to see him. And then that's when I realized he was murdered. He was dead. He was gone.
As Geraldine makes plans to lay Raheem to rest, Sierra opens her eyes and awakens after a week in the hospital. This is the moment detectives have been waiting for.
I just want to know What happened in the apartment and how she made it through? What does she know that took place?
Will the detectives get to the bottom of what went down in this tragic situation? And why?
I couldn't see anything. I just started shooting.
The truth is unbelievable.
Completely pivoted our entire investigation.
Hold up.
After a week full of waiting, theorizing, and speculating, Sierra finally tells the detectives what happened that fateful night Raheem Grant's life was cut short and his vibrant world silenced.
I couldn't see anything. I just started shooting.
She said that she shot Raheem. That completely shocked me. She initially told us that she knows that she shot him at least once, but she doesn't know how many times.
This solves the whodunit, but the investigators need to know why. Why kill Raheem, the father of your child? Was it a tragic accident? Or was Sierra gunning for someone else?
Can you tell me exactly what happened?
I remember cooking dinner and him drinking and him taking 3 Xanaxes because I asked him not to. And when he doesn't take anything, he's fine, he's happy. And he took it anyway, so I knew to be on guard. And then he told me to go in the room because he had to take care of some business. And I remember seeing a girl sitting on the couch.
When I first heard that there was a third person that's in the apartment, I started to get excited.
But who is this mysterious person? And what does she know? According to Sierra, this woman witnessed the next part of her terrifying ordeal, right after Raheem called out to Sierra from the living room.
And he came in and he said something, and I said, I can't hear what you're saying. Your music is too loud, because he didn't want to hear. He didn't want the girl to hear what he was saying. And then he hit me. And he slapped me and he started punching me.
It causes her to fall down. And as she was falling down, she says that her knife falls out and lands right next to her. Raheem ends up picking up the knife and begins trying to stab her.
And I remember crying out for help because the girl was still in my apartment. And he kept saying, shut the F up, shut the F up. And I kept saying, he's stabbing me, please help.
According to Sierra, that's when Raheem's friend leaves, and he becomes even more violent.
Her glasses had been slapped off of her face. There's blood and tears all over her eyes. She feels a gun, and she picks up the gun.
I couldn't see anything. I just started shooting.
White lies when I tell you that I'm sleeping.
Sierra was claiming that she had been suffering so much abuse over such a long period of time, and she was acting in self-defense.
Sierra sustained over 20 injuries and stab wounds so deep that she could have lost her life. It's a miracle she survived.
Unfortunately, I report on a lot of domestic violence cases where the woman is the victim. It usually happens when the woman is trying to leave or when the woman has left. Immediately, it sounds like a woman defending herself. It sounds like self-defense.
So at this point, Sierra is, she's told, you can go home.
But as Sierra's story is cut and dry as it seems, police aren't so sure.
Was there another reason why she started shooting other than this domestic incident that she was describing? It didn't make any sense to me if he was attacking her and stabbing her, how he'd received that bullet wound at the top of his head.
Raheem was shot 6 times. And not just that, he had stab wounds on his forehead, he had a stab wound on his shoulder, and then he had another one that was near his chest.
After sustaining so many life-threatening gunshot wounds, Raheem never had a chance. He was utterly powerless.
I'm not a doctor, but I believe he was shot so many times, there was so much damage, he couldn't get off that ground if he wanted to. Sierra's story wasn't adding up with the evidence that we had. And my job was to find the truth.
There's a third person, an independent witness, that can put these pieces of the puzzle together.
According to Sierra, the other woman who was in the apartment was Raheem's gym buddy, and it doesn't take long to find her and bring her in for an interview.
She tells us that she was just there to hang out. While Sierra and Raheem were in the bedroom, she starts hearing Sierra get loud, yelling at Raheem.
Before things got too heated, Raheem's friend says she sent a text at 10:26 p.m. Then she split.
The 911 call came in roughly 15 minutes later.
That large of a gap between when the incident started and when 911 call means that there was a lot of stuff that happened between then. How did he get into the position to where she would have been able to shoot him at the top of the head? It's not enough to say that this isn't self-defense.
I believe that Sierra was lying. There was more that happened that night. I'm not ready to call her a murderer, but I'm not ready to say she's a complete and innocent victim at this point either.
Are Sierra's claims about Raheem truly credible? Detectives know just who to turn to. Raheem's mom.
The police report, it just made me angry. I don't want nobody to think that Raheem is just an innocent person who is, perfect, who would do that. No, he's not. But he wasn't raised to hit a woman. So now I got into mama bear mode with the grief that I have for my son, the madness and the anger. Now I have to defend my son.
The more police speak to those closest to him, the clearer the contrast between Red Beasy, the artist, and Raheem Grant, son, father, and close friend, becomes.
Red Beasy was someone who wasn't just a trap or a street rapper. He still cared about family. They were saying he assaulted Sierra. It was just dumb. It didn't even make sense to me. He got a deal on the table. Who would work that hard and invest so much? He was too smart to do that.
So, what should detectives believe? Was Raheem a great career-minded father, like his family and friends say he was? Or was he the monster that Sierra claims him to be?
We heard from some of Sierra's family members. We heard from some friends, and we were told that Sierra wanted fame herself. In Atlanta, when you are the girlfriend of a famous rapper, there are tons of opportunities that open up for you. You can be on reality TV. You can have a rapping career of your own. Anything could happen for you.
Sierra wanted romance, but Raheem chose his career. And that's when things got complicated. But Raheem knew he had to keep it civil with Sierra, or he could lose his daughter. And just in case things got heated, Geraldine shared a fateful piece of advice.
I told him that once he felt uncomfortable with Sierra around him, to always record. And that was my thing with all of him. If you are in a predicament, if you have a camera, just record. So it would be like her word against yours. And I knew that he records everything. I was like, I need you to get his cell phone. Where's Raheem's cell phone?
Raheem's cell phone is still sitting in an evidence locker, but it could take months to get a warrant. And investigators don't have that kind of time to waste. So, the detectives shift their gaze back to Sierra. Could she be of any hope? It's a long shot, but they give it a try.
I end up calling up Sierra and saying, hey, one of the things that we want to do is go through Raheem's phone. But the problem is we don't have a passcode to it. So would you happen to know what that passcode is? And she says, I think I do. I think it might be 0025G. I turn on the phone and I put in the passcode and it opens up. And I'm thinking, it can't be this easy. So I start scrolling through the phone. I see one video that was recorded on December 29th. I take the video and I go to my lieutenant and I say, you have to see this. When I watched the video for the first time, my jaw literally dropped.
It's been 9 weeks since Raheem's murder, and after hearing Sierra's claims of self-defense, investigators don't know who to believe. That is, until they unlock Raheem's phone.
Y'all see this?
There was this huge, inaudible gasp. I could not believe what I was watching. He just recorded his own murder. The video started out with Raheem recording himself, and his face is bloody, and in the background you can hear Sierra.
Y'all see this? Look at this knife. Y'all see all this shit? That's Sierra Hart did to me. Y'all see this shit, right?
Really?
All right, hold up. Y'all.
Hey!
The first gunshot ends up hitting the bathroom mirror. And the second one ends up hitting Raheem. And he drops to the ground, and Sierra walks over to where Raheem is. She picks up the phone, and she stops the recording. I go back to the album, and then I realize that it's not just that video, but there were 3 other videos.
Baby. I'm there. Baby, stop.
No, fuck you, you beat me for 4 bad years.
All right,
It's okay.
And Sierra gets mad, and she fires 2 shots. Raheem starts to beg for his life. You can hear Angel in the background.
Close your eyes.
He starts asking Sierra, please let me kiss my daughter. And Sierra gets mad, and she fires 2 shots.
I don't care. I do not care.
They gonna lock you up for life, don't do that.
I don't care.
They gonna lock you up for life.
Sierra is refusing everything that he wants. She refuses him to have his dying wish of hugging and kissing his daughter. And the more she talks, the more she starts to upset herself. Until finally, she fires 2 more shots.
You beat me. You abused me. Fuck you.
After that last shot, you can't hear Raheem anymore. You can't hear him talking. You can't hear him breathing. You can't even hear him moving around on the ground.
This was someone who picked up a camera and talked to the camera. And then videotaped herself firing the kill shot. That I had never, ever seen with my own eyes. The only time I'd ever seen anything like that was in a movie.
This was a victim basically telling anyone who listened how he died and who killed him. It's really painful to watch. A man struggling to survive, a man begging for his life. It really is a chilling video. He recorded his own murder.
It was clear this was not self-defense.
So, police invite Sierra to the station to confront her with the evidence.
She says, I'll be more than happy to come in. She seemed to be excited. She seemed to be in good spirits. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I know what comes next. And all of this is going to change for her.
Y'all see this? Y'all see this?
We play the first video that Raheem started to record. And she's shocked. She can't tell what to make of the video. I could only imagine she may have been thinking, why did I give them that passcode? And then she puts her head down, and you can tell that she feels defeated. At which point we ended up telling her that she's under arrest and that she would go to our county jail and she will be awaiting trial.
Meanwhile, Raheem's mom and pop are shown their son's horrifying final moments.
I'm sitting there watching this video and I'm looking at her and watching her murder my son.
I haven't watched all the video. Can't do it. With murder? Man, we talking about murder. Worst kind of murder. Every shot he took, I felt it.
A crazy day in court for a woman who killed her child's father while he recorded it all. Now, this morning, she cursed at her own mother.
As Sierra and her lawyers prepare her defense, lead prosecutor John Fowler gears up for justice.
I'm John Fowler, and I was Sierra Harp's lead prosecutor. Before I meet with the family before trial, I tell them the exact same thing every time. I tell them that I have bad news and I have good news. The bad news is I cannot bring you closure. But the good news is I will fight like hell for justice.
At first glance, the most compelling piece of evidence, Raheem's cell phone video, neither confirms nor denies Sierra's claim of self-defense. But prosecutors devise a plan to look deeper and read between the lines.
We found no arrests for any type of domestic abuse, nothing along those lines in Raheem's background.
Prosecutors face an uphill battle, but not everything is as it seems. There's one last piece of evidence hidden within Raheem's video that will convict his killer.
We're going frame by frame through each and every piece of the video. And we suddenly had a theory. We had evidence. This was not self-defense. This was not battered person syndrome. It was none of those things. It was just stone cold murder.
With Sierra's defense team building their case around claims of abuse, the DA finds a secret hidden in Raheem's videos that tells a different story.
Sierra owned the fact that she killed Raheem. They just claimed that it was battered person syndrome. And they said that Raheem had routinely beaten her up over the years. And so, based upon that theory, she was always concerned that he was going to kill her.
It does sound like your typical domestic violence kind of story at first, right? She's a mom. She's a young mom. She wouldn't be capable of hurting someone like that.
To win this case, it comes down to who the jury believes. And character is everything. Unfortunately, Raheem's carefully crafted brand as an artist isn't helping.
Now you got a trial. So now you got to sit there and watch your son be accused of things that he wasn't and haven't done. So now you got to defend him.
Sierra sticks to her story of abuse. But when the prosecution gears up, they have something more than just words and claims. While the jury watches on in horrified silence, they finally spot the moment that Raheem catches his killer.
So that final frame where we're able to see that her pants leg is rolled up and we're able to match it to her tattoo that we have pictures of from when she was at the hospital with a stab mark right next to it. But in this frame, that stab mark is not there.
She inflicted those wounds on herself.
Raheem was on the ground, and you can tell that he was no longer a threat to her. There was nothing that he could have done at that point. So after watching the video, it was clear that she had stabbed herself.
There was absolutely no way that Raheem could have used that knife to stab Sierra in the legs, which absolutely 100% disproved what Sierra told us. The video was the star of the show. That was the unforgettable part that no one could forget.
The jury finds Sierra Harp guilty of murder. During sentencing, in one last moment of desperation, Sierra attempts to elicit sympathy.
And I throw myself at the mercy of the court.
30-year-old Sierra Harp asked the court for leniency during her sentencing hearing in the murder of her child's father, Raheem Grant.
Seemed like Sierra found this man who she loved. His star was rising, and she didn't want him to leave. And really, he never left that apartment alive.
We were able to see that, she had a difficult upbringing as a child. She would bounce from home to home. She craved that stability, and it was not coming the way she wanted it to. It bubbled and boiled under the surface for years, and it just culminated that night in December.
I truly apologize, and I'm very sorry.
The woman took the stand and apologized to the victim's mother.
I was not in my right state of mind.
Had I not been drunk, it would have never happened.
Mrs. Grant Bryson.
I am truly, truly sorry.
And I throw myself at the mercy of the court. She's not sorry. She's just sorry she got caught.
How can I fight?
If she had to do it all over again, she would still murder him.
A Clayton County woman is sentenced to 125 years in prison for a murder recorded on cell phone.
The judge gave her the maximum, gave her 125 years based upon the depravity of the crime. It was just stone cold murder.
Uncertain of my...
I was happy, but I like I told her, I would have preferred to slap her too. And that didn't make me feel good at all, but it made me feel that nobody else would go through what I went through.
125 years, so what? She's still breathing. He's not living, he's not breathing. Did him worse than a dog.
If the video had never existed, there wouldn't really be anything that we could prove. We have to tell the victim's story. In this case, Raheem ended up telling us his own story.
Let me show you something. Look at these pictures right here. Oh.
I remember when my dad took me to that place.
Geraldine was a driving force. She was very adamant. We need to look at his cell phone. I don't think we would have secured a conviction without those videos.
I remember that.
Yeah, look at him.
Anybody can be a victim of domestic violence, and it is not uncommon for men to be victims of domestic violence.
When Raheem died, the world lost the father, a creative. Guarantee you, Angel, you'd have been right along on the ride with him.
Geraldine has since become an advocate for fathers in the family court system.
Here in Georgia, the mother's the one that is the owner of the baby, and the daddy has no rights, which is a law we're trying to change. Angel, and she's doing much, much better now because she says that her dad is watching down over her, and I kept her to seeing that, your dad is watching over you, he loved you.
I love my dad.
The year 1995 in Southern California existed beneath a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere of violence, a time when the sprawling concrete arteries of Los Angeles and its surrounding cities were less defined by their proximity to the Pacific Ocean and more by the invisible, blood-soaked borders drawn by street syndicates. The decade had seen the peak of a terrifying epidemic of gang warfare, an era where territorial disputes were settled not with fists, but with fully automatic weapons in broad daylight. In the shadows of palm trees and beneath the glaring amber streetlights, a war of attrition was being waged. Law enforcement agencies were overwhelmed, communities were paralyzed by fear, and the evening news was a relentless, rolling ledger of casualties. But even in an era desensitized to brutality, certain crimes manage to pierce through the static of everyday violence. They stand apart not just because of the lives lost, but because of the sheer, chilling mechanics of the act itself. This is a story about the absolute intersection of innocence and unfathomable cruelty, unfolding in the quietest hours of the night in a place completely detached from the criminal underworld. To understand the gravity of what transpired on that quiet edge of Long Beach, one must first understand the ecosystem of the streets during that specific era. The west side of Long Beach was a complex mosaic of working-class neighborhoods, industrial zones, and commercial strips that faded into desolate stretches as the sun went down. It was a territory historically contested by deeply entrenched African-American and Latino street gangs, organizations that had spent decades building their numbers, their arsenals, and their fearsome reputations. Surviving in this environment required an entity to be either completely invisible or undeniably terrifying. For a marginalized group of immigrants arriving from the South Pacific, invisibility was not an option, and so they chose the latter path. This was the crucible that forged the Sons of Samoa, widely known on the streets as SOS, a fiercely violent offshoot formerly aligned with the broader Crips network. The Sons of Samoa were not an ordinary street gang. Their origins were rooted in the migration of families from American Samoa seeking a better life in the United States, only to find themselves thrust into the unforgiving environment of Southern California's ganglands. Displaced, alienated, and surrounded by hostile, established factions, the youth of these immigrant communities banded together for mutual protection. But what began as a defensive posture rapidly metastasized into something predatory and deeply entrenched in the criminal enterprise. In a landscape dominated by large, heavily armed rivals, the Sons of Samoa realized that intimidation was their most valuable currency. They possessed a distinct, undeniable physical advantage. The members of this organization were renowned throughout the American underworld for their massive, imposing physical stature. They were giants walking the concrete, men of extraordinary muscular build whose very presence commanded immediate, terrified submission from rivals and civilians alike. However, size alone was not enough to secure their territory or their illicit enterprises. The Sons of Samoa weaponized their physical dominance with an explosive, volatile brand of violence that quickly became their signature. In the hierarchy of street gangs, reputation is everything, and SOS systematically cultivated a reputation for absolute ruthlessness. They utilized explosive brutality as a primary tool to carve out their territory, refusing to back down from the larger African-American and Latino organizations that surrounded them. They needed to prove that crossing them was a fatal miscalculation, and they delivered this message through a sustained campaign of extreme violence. By the mid-1990s, they had successfully expanded their influence far beyond neighborhood skirmishes. They were deeply involved in a sophisticated network of extortion, the distribution of narcotics, and heavily armed, highly coordinated takeover robberies. These were not desperate snatch-and-grab thefts. They were calculated operations where massive, heavily armed men would lock down a commercial establishment, terrorize everyone inside, and strip the place of its assets with militaristic efficiency. It is within this volatile context that the late hours of a fateful night in 1995 began to unfold. On the outer fringes of Long Beach, away from the dense residential blocks and the immediate sight lines of police patrols, sat a modest, unassuming pizza shop. It was a typical neighborhood fixture, the kind of establishment illuminated by flickering neon signs that cast long, colorful shadows across an empty parking lot. By midnight, the surrounding area was desolate. The heavy traffic of the daytime had long since vanished, leaving behind a quiet isolation. Inside the shop, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the dangerous streets outside. The air was thick with the lingering, comforting smell of baked dough, melted cheese, and marinara sauce. The heavy ovens hummed a low, constant mechanical rhythm, a sound that usually signaled the winding down of a long, exhausting shift. Working this late shift were 3 young men. They were not hardened figures of the night. They were teenagers and young adults navigating the early chapters of their lives. They were part-time employees, working antisocial hours to earn minimum wage. Their motivations were simple and universal: saving up for college tuition, paying for a reliable car, or simply trying to support themselves and their families in a city that demanded a steep price for survival. They wore flour-dusted uniforms and visors, their hands stained with cornmeal, their minds likely focused on the mundane tasks of closing up the shop. They were wiping down stainless steel counters, sweeping up the debris of the evening rush, and waiting for the final minutes to tick by so they could lock the glass doors and go home to their beds. These three young men had absolutely no ties to the gang wars ravaging Los Angeles County. They did not wear colors, they did not claim territory, and they did not recognize the complex, deadly politics of the streets. They were entirely innocent, existing in a safe, brightly lit bubble of domestic commerce, completely unaware of the monstrous figures moving through the darkness outside. The streets of West Side Long Beach at this hour belonged to the predators. While the young pizza shop workers were counting crumpled, greasy dollar bills from the register, a vehicle crept through the peripheral darkness. Inside were members of the Sons of Samoa, heavily armed and operating with a cold, detached focus. They were hunting for an easy target, a place isolated enough to avoid immediate police response, with enough cash on hand to justify the risk. The neon glow of the pizza shop at the edge of town presented the perfect opportunity. There are no security guards, no reinforced glass, just three exhausted kids waiting to go home. The gang members prepared themselves, checking the chambers of their weapons, pulling down the brims of their baseball caps, and securing their bandanas over their faces to obscure their identities. They were not operating in a state of chaotic frenzy. This was a routine, a systematic execution of a takeover robbery that they had likely rehearsed and performed numerous times before. The juxtaposition between the victims and the perpetrators in this moment is profound and chilling. On one side of the thin glass door was a world of innocent, mundane labor. Young men thinking about their futures, their studies, their families. On the other side was a manifestation of pure, unadulterated street violence. Massive, heavily armed men who viewed human life as an entirely disposable obstacle in the pursuit of currency. The pizza shop, with its warm light and humming machinery, was about to be violently ruptured by the dark reality of 1995 Long Beach. As the clock edged closer to midnight, the lock on the front door remained unbolted, a fatal vulnerability in a city at war. The quiet hum of the refrigerators and the rhythmic wiping of the countertops were about to be shattered. The young men inside had no warning, no intuition of the danger closing in on them. They were simply trying to finish their shift, completely blind to the fact that the giants of the California underworld had just chosen their door to walk through, bringing with them a darkness from which none of them would ever emerge. The transition from the mundane rhythm of late-night labor to a state of absolute, paralyzing terror does not occur gradually. It snaps into existence with the sudden, concussive violence of a breaking bone. Inside the brightly lit pizza shop on the desolate edge of Long Beach, the ambient noise had been a comforting, familiar symphony. The heavy industrial ovens hummed with a low, constant mechanical vibration, a sound that usually signaled the winding down of a long, exhausting shift. The metal spatulas scraped rhythmically against the preparation counters as the three young employees worked to clear away the debris of the evening rush. Their minds were untroubled, focused entirely on the simple, universal desires of the working class at midnight. Finishing their cleaning tasks, locking the heavy glass doors, and returning to the safety of their homes. They existed in a secure, insulated bubble of domestic commerce, completely severed from the brutal realities of the gangland warfare raging just blocks away. The air was thick with the warm, heavy scent of baking dough, melted mozzarella, and sharp marinara sauce. It was an environment of peace, routine, and quiet camaraderie among three young men trying to earn an honest living. Then, the heavy glass door at the front of the establishment did not merely open. It was thrust inward with a violent, overwhelming force that rattled the metal frame on its hinges and instantly silenced the quiet hum of the room. The small cluster of bells attached to the top of the door, meant to offer a cheerful, chiming announcement of a late-arriving customer, clattered wildly against the glass. It was a chaotic, discordant jingle that would serve as the final sound of ordinary life these three victims would ever hear. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous and catastrophic. The warm, flower-scented air of the kitchen was violently displaced by the cold, biting night wind sweeping in from the empty parking lot, carrying with it an unmistakable, suffocating aura of imminent threat. The invisible boundary between the safety of the illuminated shop and the predatory darkness of the street had been shattered. Through the violently opened doorway stepped an overwhelming physical presence. 3, perhaps 4 figures breached the threshold. The exact number would later become a blur in the chaotic, fragmented reconstruction of the crime scene, but their sheer mass was an undeniable, terrifying reality. These were not desperate, twitchy addicts looking for a quick, chaotic score to feed a debilitating habit. These were the active soldiers of the Sons of Samoa. As they crossed into the brightly lit customer waiting area, they seemed to physically eclipse the fluorescent light pouring down from the ceiling panels. Their physical stature was staggering, a deliberate cultivation of genetic advantage and relentless conditioning. They were built with the dense, towering musculature characteristic of their Pacific Islander heritage, their broad, heavy shoulders completely filling the width of the entranceway. In the confined, familiar space of a neighborhood pizza shop, they appeared as towering monoliths of impending violence. They cast long, menacing, impenetrable shadows that stretched aggressively across the checkered linoleum floor, rapidly swallowing the space where the young employees stood frozen. Their faces were entirely obscured, purposefully hidden behind the pulled-down brims of dark baseball caps and thick, tightly woven bandanas pulled up across the bridges of their noses. Only their eyes remained visible above the fabric, and what lay within those eyes was perhaps the most terrifying element of the intrusion. There was no manic energy, no nervous hesitation, no adrenaline-fueled panic. Their gaze was completely flat, emotionally hollow, and entirely desensitized to the profound horror they were actively introducing into the room. It was the detached, chilling look of men performing a deeply mundane, routine task. In their massive, heavily calloused hands, they held heavy-caliber, semi-automatic handguns. The dark, cold metal of the weapons seemed to absorb the neon light reflecting off the window displays. The firearms were already drawn, the chambers already loaded, the barrels already leveled directly at the chests of the 3 young men standing behind the counter. There was no theatrical waving of the guns, no shouted, chaotic demands for attention. The weapons were held with a steady, practiced, and unwavering grip, an extension of their massive arms, pointing with a deadly certainty that required no translation. For the 3 young employees, the world essentially stopped spinning on its axis. The human brain, when confronted with a sudden, overwhelming, and absolute threat to its continued existence, often bypasses all rational thought, all complex problem-solving, and plunges directly into the deepest, most primal state of preservation. There was no heroic resistance born of cinematic bravery. There was no split-second calculation of defensive maneuvers. There was only the freezing, debilitating, paralyzing grip of pure terror. The young man who had been rhythmically sweeping the customer floor let the wooden broom handle slip blindly from his trembling fingers. It clattered loudly against the floor tiles, a sharp, wooden smack that seemed deafening in the sudden, heavy vacuum of the room. The employee standing at the primary cash register, his hands still lightly dusted with the powdery white residue of pizza dough, froze entirely, his fingers hovering rigidly over the plastic keys. The 3rd young man, who was just emerging from the back kitchen carrying a heavy stack of clean, silver metal baking pans, stopped dead in his tracks. His breath caught sharply in his throat as his eyes locked onto the black, hollow, inescapable circles of the gun barrels pointing directly at his center of mass. The silence that immediately followed the physical breach was heavier, more suffocating, and far more terrifying than any scream could ever hope to be. In fictionalized depictions of violence, armed robberies are frequently portrayed as highly chaotic, screaming affairs filled with kinetic, explosive energy. The reality of this specific takeover was entirely different, steeped in a terrifyingly quiet, mechanical efficiency. The victims did not scream because the primal, suffocating fear constricting their throats physically stole their voices. They simply, instinctively raised their hands in the air. Their palms were open, their fingers shaking uncontrollably, surrendering themselves entirely to the towering, armed figures standing before them. They telegraphed absolute, unquestioning compliance with every single fiber of their physical beings. They were ordinary, law-abiding young men who fundamentally understood the rules of the world they lived in. They knew that the paper money resting in the register drawer was insured by a corporation, that the dough resting in the back kitchen was merely a mixture of flour and water, and that no amount of minimum wage compensation was worth taking a bullet to the chest. They wanted nothing more than to survive the next 5 minutes. They wanted to see the sun rise. They wanted to go home. The heavy, thick-soled boots of the intruders scuffed heavily against the freshly cleaned linoleum as they closed the distance, advancing deliberately toward the front counter. The sheer physical proximity of the gang members was overwhelming, bringing with them the harsh, metallic smell of gun oil and the cold scent of the midnight streets. One of the massive men gestured sharply, almost impatiently, with the dark barrel of his weapon toward the electronic cash register. It was a silent, unmistakable, and absolute command. The young employee trapped behind the counter, his heart hammering against his ribs with the frantic, terrifying rhythm of a trapped bird, moved with frantic, uncoordinated, jerky motions. His trembling fingers struggled violently to hit the correct combination of plastic buttons to pop the secure drawer. When the heavy metal till finally slid open with a sharp, echoing mechanical chime, he did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He began frantically pulling the crumpled, greasy bills from their designated slots, his hands moving as fast as his rising panic would physically allow. 5s, 10s, 20s, the meager, unremarkable profits of a slow, quiet Tuesday night on the edge of the city. He pushed the loose wad of paper money aggressively across the polished stainless steel of the counter, dropping his gaze, absolutely terrified of making eye contact with the cold, hollow eyes of the massive man taking it from him. The money was snatched up instantly by a massive hand, the crumpled bills disappearing seamlessly into the dark pocket of a heavy jacket. It was a pathetic, almost insulting haul, a sum of money hardly worth the extreme risk of an armed, coordinated incursion. Yet the intruders showed absolutely no reaction. There was no vocalized disappointment, no sudden flash of anger at the low yield. They operated with a chilling, robotic detachment. At this specific juncture, the unwritten, universally understood script of a standard armed robbery strictly dictates that the perpetrators retreat. They had successfully acquired the money. The vital element of surprise was rapidly fading with each passing second. The logical, expected next step was to back out cautiously through the shattered glass door, disappear rapidly into the protective darkness of the sprawling parking lot, and leave the terrified, hyperventilating clerks behind to dial the police. The young men behind the counter, though rigidly locked in fear and struggling to pull oxygen into their lungs, desperately, silently clung to this hope. They had offered zero resistance. They had given the monsters exactly what they demanded. Surely, the nightmare had reached its conclusion. But the massive men from the Sons of Samoa did not take a single step backward toward the exit. They did not lower the heavy barrels of their weapons. Instead, the heavy atmosphere within the room shifted violently, transitioning from the tense, terrifying reality of a robbery into something infinitely darker, more profound, and hopelessly sinister. The cold, calculating, visible gaze of the intruders slowly swept over the 3 trembling employees, lingering deliberately on their young, terrified faces. The suffocating silence stretched on, stretching the seconds into an agonizing, unbearable eternity. It was within this heavy, terrible, dragging pause that the true, horrific nature of the intrusion finally revealed itself. This operation was no longer simply about the meager stack of bills resting in the register. The three young men standing with their hands raised were no longer just temporary obstacles to be bypassed. They were living, breathing liabilities. They were loose ends that could not be permitted to exist. With a sharp, guttural, unintelligible command barked from behind a bandana, the intruders violently broke the oppressive silence. The firearms jerked aggressively, not pointing toward the glass door leading to freedom, but gesturing threateningly toward the very back of the deep establishment. They were physically driving the employees away from the large glass storefront windows, away from the faint, desperate possibility of being spotted by a passing, late-night police patrol car, and forcing them deep into the lightless, isolated depths of the shop. The three young men, their legs weak, trembling, and heavily uncoordinated from the massive, toxic dump of adrenaline flooding their bloodstreams, stumbled backward in horrified unison. They were herded together like terrified cattle, completely surrounded and dwarfed by the towering, impenetrable, muscular mass of their captors. Every single agonizing step they took away from the brightly lit front counter was a step away from safety, away from the fragile world they knew, and deeper into a suffocating, inescapable nightmare they could not possibly comprehend. They were marched aggressively through the narrow, greasy corridor of the preparation kitchen. The long stainless steel tables, usually the bustling center of their productive nighttime routine, now looked like cold, sterile, metallic slabs in a morgue. The heavy industrial ovens, still radiating a massive amount of residual heat, suddenly felt deeply suffocating, pressing the air out of their lungs. They moved blindly past the large, silver walk-in refrigerator, its heavy metallic doors sealed tightly shut, and past the deep washing sinks piled high with dirty metal utensils, until they finally reached the very rear boundary of the building. Here, tucked away from any public view, lay the dry storage room, an entirely windowless, isolated concrete bunker sitting at the absolute back of the property line. This was not a room designed or meant for extended human habitation. It was a purely functional, industrial space, deeply cramped, dusty, and intensely claustrophobic. The air in this back room was completely stagnant, thick with the dry, powdery, choking scent of massive, industrial-sized sacks of white flour piled precariously high against the rough, unpainted concrete block walls. Towering, unstable stacks of flattened, unconstructed brown cardboard pizza boxes leaned heavily in the dark corners, creating deep, sharp-edged, menacing shadows that seemed to absorb what little light existed. The only source of illumination in the entire room was a single, bare, low-wattage yellow incandescent bulb hanging limply from a frayed wire on the low ceiling. It cast a sickly, jaundiced, uneven light across the small, confined space, catching and illuminating the thousands of floating, microscopic particles of flour dust that danced lazily and silently in the stale, dead air. The three young employees were shoved forcefully and without warning into this tiny, confined space. They stumbled over their own feet and crashed into one another, their backs violently hitting the rough, dusty canvas texture of the stacked flour sacks. The small room was instantly and overwhelmingly overcrowded, dominated entirely by the immense, suffocating physical bulk of the Samoan gang members who stepped in after them, effectively and completely sealing off the only doorway, blocking any impossible, desperate avenue of escape. The sickly yellow light cascaded down upon the horrifying scene, throwing harsh, unforgiving shadows that highlighted the stark, absolute terror permanently etched into the pale faces of the young victims, and glinting coldly off the unyielding, dark metal of the handguns that were still pointed directly, unwavering, at their heads. The comforting ambient noise of the heavy ovens in the front kitchen was deeply muffled back here, replaced entirely by the ragged, desperate, hyperventilating panting of the three terrified teenagers. They were hopelessly trapped in a concrete dead end, cornered like animals in a windowless vault with men who clearly operated far outside the established boundaries of human empathy or societal law. They had offered absolutely no physical or verbal resistance. They had immediately and willingly surrendered every dollar they had access to. They had done exactly, precisely as they were commanded to do by the men holding the guns. Yet as they stood trembling violently in the dim, powdery yellow light of that isolated storage room, surrounded by nothing but sacks of flour and empty cardboard boxes, looking up at the merciless, silent giants physically blocking their only exit to the outside world, a sickening, ultimate realization began to settle over them like a heavy lead weight. The financial robbery portion of the night was over, but the actual, unimaginable violence was only just beginning. The cold, inescapable reality of their final situation hung heavily and terribly in the dusty, stagnant air. They had not been herded into this back room merely to be temporarily secured or tied up while the robbers made a clean, quiet escape into the night. They had been brought back into this windowless, isolated concrete box to be removed from the equation entirely. The small, windowless storage room seemed to shrink even further as the silence thickened, becoming a physical presence in the room, suffocating and absolute. The sickly yellow light from the solitary, exposed bulb overhead swung slightly, caught by the movement of the air, casting long, erratic, and skeletal shadows that danced rhythmically across the rough concrete block walls. The young victims, pressed back against the coarse, dust-covered surface of the industrial flour sacks, could feel the grit of the warehouse through their thin uniforms. Their breaths were coming in short, shallow, and ragged gasps, the frantic physiological response of bodies being flooded with an impossible, terminal level of adrenaline. They were pinned by the gaze of the men standing before them, men whose imposing physical frames seemed to consume the entirety of the cramped space, blocking the only path to the kitchen and the exit beyond. The air in the room was heavy, stagnant, and tasted of dust and the metallic, bitter tang of impending finality. The perpetrators, still maintaining the terrifying, mechanical detachment that had defined their entry, did not rush. They did not shout, nor did they display the agitated, unpredictable energy of men caught in a moment of panic. Instead, they moved with the eerie, deliberate poise of executioners performing a standard, mundane procedure, a process that had been mentally rehearsed long before they had ever set foot in the shop. One of the men, the largest of the group, shifted his weight, his heavy, thick-soled boots grounding firmly into the dusty floorboards. He looked at his companions, his eyes reflecting nothing but a cold, flat, and absolute resolve. There was no hesitation in his movements, no flicker of doubt, and certainly no shred of human empathy or conflict. It was a sterile, businesslike assessment of a problem that required a permanent solution. The victims, sensing the shift in the air, found their legs buckling further, their knees sinking onto the hard, unforgiving surface of the concrete floor. They did not need a command to know what was expected of them. The posture of the men holding the weapons, the rigid alignment of the barrels, and the absolute lack of dialogue made the trajectory of the next few moments chillingly clear. They were ordered to kneel. The command was silent, delivered through a curt, downward gesture of a massive, weapon-wielding hand, a signal so pervasive and unmistakable that the victims complied with a trembling, desperate obedience. As they knelt, their foreheads bowed toward the floor, they were essentially being placed into the final, submissive configuration of the condemned. The room, which only moments ago had been filled with the ordinary, mechanical hum of a pizza shop's closing routine, was now transformed into a site of profound, clinical butchery. The young men were positioned against the rear wall, their bodies curled in a pathetic attempt to shield themselves, their eyes squeezed shut against the harsh, flickering yellow light. They were trapped in the ultimate, agonizing helplessness, their lives effectively suspended in the few seconds of air remaining between them and the inevitable, cold reality of the steel pointed at their skulls. The logic behind this decision was as repulsive as it was calculated. In the brutal, unforgiving calculus of the Sons of Samoa, and indeed within the broader, lawless landscape of 1995 street warfare, the greatest liability any perpetrator could leave behind was a witness. A witness was a link, a trail of evidence, a living piece of testimony that could bridge the gap between the shadows of the street and the blinding, clinical glare of a courtroom. To these men, the lives of these 3 young employees possessed no intrinsic value. They were merely biological variables that needed to be neutralized to ensure their own survival. The decision to execute was not a reaction to a threat or a sudden, explosive outburst of rage. It was a cold, pragmatic business decision. One of the gang members, looking down at the quivering backs of the kneeling youths, offered a faint, nearly imperceptible nod to his peers. That single, slight motion was the final, irreversible punctuation point of the narrative. It was the confirmation that no witnesses would walk out of that store, and that the silence of the night would be absolute. The perpetrators moved with a synchronized, chilling efficiency. They did not step back to maintain distance. They stepped forward, encroaching upon the very personal space of the victims, their towering figures looming over the kneeling men like looming giants of shadow. The cold, black metal barrels of the semi-automatic handguns were pressed firmly, indifferently, against the base of the victims' skulls, a touch so icy it felt like a brand of fire against the skin. The sensations were heightened to an excruciating degree. The harsh, dusty smell of the flour, the low, rhythmic ticking of the oven timers in the distance, the feel of the rough concrete beneath their palms, and the terrifying, heavy silence that preceded the violence. Each young man was held in place, immobilized by the sheer, crushing weight of their own paralyzing terror, their heartbeats thundering in their ears like the frantic, final drumbeats of a retreating army. Then, without a single word of apology, without a single moment of mercy, and without any further delay, the triggers were pulled. The sequence was so rapid, so deliberate, and so devastatingly efficient that it seemed to compress the entirety of the room's atmosphere into a single concussive point. The shots did not ring out as separate, chaotic events. They were a sharp, synchronized, and thunderous eruption that shattered the sanctity of the space. The sound was deafening, a roar that tore through the narrow confines of the storage room, the kinetic energy of the bullets creating a momentary, blinding pressure in the small area. The concrete floor, previously dusty and quiet, was instantly transformed into a landscape of horrific, irreparable destruction. The victims did not have the chance to process the finality of the moment. They were gone before their minds could even register the chemical flash of the muzzle or the explosive force of the impact. The suddenness was the most profound cruelty. One moment they were huddled, breathing, and terrified human beings, sons, students, and employees, and the next they were merely inanimate mass, slumped against the sacks of flour that had offered them no protection. The air in the storage room changed instantly, filled with the acrid, biting, and thick scent of gunpowder, a harsh, metallic tang that seemed to coat the back of the throat. This dark, swirling cloud of smoke mingled with the white, fine particles of displaced flour, creating a surreal, nightmare-like haze that drifted slowly through the yellow light of the bulb. The quiet, which had been heavy before, was now absolute, broken only by the settling of dust and the faint, receding echoes of the violence that had just transpired. The men responsible for this act did not linger to admire or contemplate the aftermath. They did not experience any surge of pride or any visible signs of regret. They simply turned, their movements as calm and unhurried as they had been upon their entry. They stepped over the bodies with a casual, indifferent stride, their boots barely avoiding the spreading, dark pools of liquid pooling on the concrete floor. They exited the back storage room, passed through the quiet, abandoned kitchen, and moved back out toward the front of the shop. Their exit was just as efficient as their arrival. They slipped back through the glass door, vanished into the dark, desolate expanse of the parking lot, and disappeared into the night, leaving behind nothing but the cold, lingering residue of a nightmare that would permanently scar the collective conscience of the city. The shop fell back into a state of profound, haunting stillness. The yellow light of the storage room continued to burn, flickering periodically as it illuminated the wreckage of 3 young, promising lives. There was no one to hear the gunfire, no one to rush to their aid, and no one to witness the immediate, final act of the tragedy. The business, the money in the register, and the routine of the night had all ceased to exist, replaced by a scene of clinical, senseless execution. The silence in the back room was now the silence of the grave, a crushing, empty weight that pressed down upon the cold floorboards. The flour sacks, once a symbol of the shop's humble, productive livelihood, were now witnesses to the most absolute of finalities. Outside, the night remained indifferent, the shadows of the palm trees still swaying in the gentle Pacific breeze, the streetlights still casting their long, amber glows over a city that had absolutely no idea that, in the space of a few short minutes, a part of its humanity had been brutally, irrevocably extinguished. The killers had left, the door had been left slightly ajar, and the cold, empty air of the desert night began to circulate into the building, as if the very atmosphere itself was trying to scrub away the lingering scent of death from the crime scene. There would be no witnesses to speak of what happened, only the cold, unyielding evidence left in the yellow light, waiting for the dawn to bring the first, horrifying realization of the atrocity that had taken place. The dawn that broke over Long Beach the following morning arrived with a deceptive, cruel serenity. The sun climbed steadily over the horizon, bathing the industrial stretches of the city in a golden, warming light that seemed entirely incongruous with the horror contained within the walls of the pizza shop. For the early morning staff, the arrival at the establishment was a routine dictated by the mechanical precision of the clock. A shift supervisor, perhaps arriving early to prep the dough or finalize the closing logistics of the previous night, stepped out of their vehicle in the parking lot. The air was cool, smelling of the Pacific mist and the urban grit of a California morning. There was no premonition, no sudden prickle of alarm on the back of their neck. The store looked exactly as it had when the night crew had locked up, or, more accurately, as it appeared when they had failed to lock up properly. As the supervisor unlocked the front entrance, the bell above the door gave a light, singular chime, a sound that in the context of the night before would have been a funeral knell, but today was merely the start of a Tuesday. The interior of the shop was unervingly silent. The heavy ovens were cold, the air was still, and the usual bustle of early morning prep was absent. As the supervisor moved further into the kitchen, the reality of the situation began to unfurl with a sickening, accelerating pace. The scene was not chaotic. It was eerily orderly, as if the shop had been frozen in a state of sudden, violent suspension. When they reached the back area, approaching the storage room door that had been left slightly ajar, the visual confirmation of the horror inside hit with the physical weight of a sledgehammer. The sight of the 3 young men, sprawled in the yellow light, their bodies broken in the quiet, dusty expanse of the back room, shattered the supervisor's reality in a heartbeat. The subsequent descent into a frantic, panicked attempt to contact emergency services marked the beginning of a massive, citywide mobilization that would soon engulf the entire law enforcement apparatus of Long Beach. The reaction from the Long Beach Police Department was immediate and, given the nature of the crime, unprecedented in its intensity. This was not a standard robbery gone wrong. The clinical, execution-style nature of the killings transformed the incident into a singular, defining atrocity. The scene was quickly cordoned off, the yellow police tape fluttering in the breeze like a grim banner against the industrial backdrop. Detectives, forensic technicians, and specialists from the Homicide Division swarmed the location, their flashlights and cameras capturing the haunting, monochromatic stillness of the storage room. Every shell casing, every splatter of blood, and every fingerprint was treated with the surgical precision required for a case of this magnitude. But the physical evidence was only the beginning. The brutal, callous efficiency of the murders demanded a strategic response that reached far beyond the immediate crime scene. Recognizing that the perpetrators had operated with the coordinated, militaristic discipline characteristic of organized street syndicates, the Long Beach Police Department reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The formation of a dedicated joint task force was announced within 48 hours. This was a direct, aggressive declaration of war against the Sons of Samoa. The investigation was structured to be as comprehensive as it was relentless, targeting not just the specific individuals who had walked through the pizza shop's doors, but the entire infrastructure of the gang itself. The detectives knew that the key to solving a case of this nature, one committed by a group that thrived on the protective silence of their own insular community, was to break that very silence. The investigation transitioned from a standard search for a suspect into a wide-scale, systematic dismantling of the gang's operational capacity. The task force launched what was described as a comprehensive gang sweep across the entirety of South California. The objective was multifaceted: to gather intelligence, to pressure the periphery of the organization, and to create an environment where the internal solidarity of the Sons of Samoa would begin to fracture. Every known hideout, every suspected commercial front, and every residence associated with the high-ranking members of the SOS was subjected to intensive surveillance and, where legal justification permitted, rapid response raids. These were not random acts of police harassment. They were tactical, intelligence-driven incursions designed to disrupt the gang's income streams and force the hand of its members. The pressure was applied with a heavy, unyielding hand. Individuals previously associated with minor criminal activities, narcotics possession, illegal firearm ownership, or parole violations, were brought in for questioning, their lives subjected to the forensic scrutiny of federal agents who were focused on one specific, horrific night in Long Beach. The psychological warfare utilized by the task force was as important as the legal leverage they deployed. The detectives understood that members of such a tight-knit organization were often bound by a code of silence, a fear of retribution that was more powerful than the fear of the law. To counter this, the investigators worked to systematically alienate the suspects from their support structures. By flooding the streets with patrols, executing search warrants with overwhelming displays of force, and demonstrating that the law enforcement agencies would not stop until the individuals responsible were behind bars, they successfully created a climate of instability. The message was clear. The cost of maintaining silence was becoming significantly higher than the potential consequences of cooperating. As the weeks dragged on, the initial silence began to show signs of wear. The constant raids and the relentless surveillance began to drain the resources of the gang, making the daily life of its members increasingly precarious. Inside the interrogation rooms, the detectives were not merely asking questions. They were crafting a detailed, undeniable map of the gang's hierarchy. They leveraged every small piece of information, every fragmented detail about the night of the shooting, and every lead regarding the movements of the primary suspects. The strategy was to isolate the individuals who had actually committed the execution, making them feel that their own organization was beginning to turn against them in the face of such overwhelming pressure. The turning point came when the first of the informants, feeling the weight of the federal charges and the mounting danger of being associated with the pizza shop massacre, finally cracked. The details provided by these individuals were chillingly consistent with the evidence recovered at the scene. They spoke of the planning behind a robbery, the specific individuals chosen for the takeover, and the cold, calculated decision to eliminate the witnesses. The accounts were not the desperate inventions of men seeking to escape punishment, but detailed, verifiable narratives that aligned with the forensic evidence. This intel allowed the investigators to bridge the gap between the amorphous, elusive nature of the gang and the specific, individual identities of the men who had pulled the triggers. Every detail of the investigation was meticulously documented, from the ballistic analysis of the recovered casings, which confirmed the specific weapon types used, to the surveillance footage gathered from neighboring businesses that captured the vehicle used in the getaway. The case was constructed like a fortress. The prosecutors, working in tandem with the FBI and the Long Beach police, were preparing an argument that would leave no room for ambiguity or doubt. They were not just presenting a story of a robbery gone wrong. They were illustrating a systematic, premeditated act of mass murder. The investigation, which had begun in the quiet, dusty silence of a back storage room, was now culminating in the systematic exposure of the violent underbelly of the city. The detectives spent countless hours cross-referencing the statements of informants, matching the digital breadcrumbs left by the suspects, and analyzing the complex, shifting allegiances within the Sons of Samoa. They had to be certain. They were dealing with a group that had spent years refining the art of evasion, and any failure to secure the evidence would result in the perpetrators walking free. The level of detail required was immense, covering everything from the gang's internal hierarchy to the personal motivations of each individual involved in the night of the crime. This was a case where the stakes were absolute. The families of the 3 victims, who had been waiting in an agony of uncertainty, needed to know that the process of justice was moving forward with an unshakable determination. By the time the task force was ready to move, they had successfully woven a net that encompassed all the key players. The process had been long, grinding, and often frustrating, but it had achieved its primary objective: the disintegration of the protective wall the gang had built around itself. The atmosphere of invincibility that had shielded the Sons of Samoa for so long was effectively dismantled, replaced by the crushing reality of federal indictment. The detectives, exhausted but resolute, watched as the final pieces of the case clicked into place. They had taken a crime that was intended to vanish into the night, a crime designed to exist only in the form of 3 empty lives, and they had forced it into the harsh, undeniable light of the judicial system. The investigation had been a grueling testament to the power of persistent, collaborative law enforcement against even the most entrenched and ruthless of organizations. The next phase, the transition from the investigative field to the sterile, confrontational environment of the courtroom, was now the singular focus of the entire prosecution team. They were ready to bring the perpetrators to face the ultimate legal consequence for the darkness they had unleashed in the heart of Long Beach. The progression from the investigative phase to the courtroom represented a profound shift in the narrative of the Pizza Shop massacre. The evidence, painstakingly gathered through months of persistent surveillance, intelligence gathering, and a strategic leveraging of informants, was now meticulously assembled into a legal argument that aimed to secure a definitive judgment. The trial was not merely an administrative procedure. It was a public reckoning. It transformed the cold, clinical facts of the crime, the tactical movements, the forensic findings, and the sequence of the execution into a coherent, undeniable reality that was presented before a jury of peers. The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged with a heavy, somber gravity. Members of the victims' families who had endured the agonizing uncertainty of the investigation were present, their faces etched with the permanent pain of their loss. Across the room, the accused sat in a row, stripped of their menacing street presence, appearing diminished and vulnerable beneath the harsh, sterile lighting of the judicial chamber. The prosecution opened their case with a structured, methodical presentation that left little room for narrative divergence. They began by establishing the context of the Sons of Samoa, not as an abstract criminal entity, but as a disciplined organization that operated with a chilling level of coordination. They mapped out the timeline of the night in question, utilizing the ballistic reports and forensic evidence recovered from the back storage room to walk the jury through the exact, horrifying minutes that transpired. The lead prosecutor spoke with a deliberate, calm tone, avoiding unnecessary theatricality. Instead, they relied on the raw, unvarnished facts to paint a picture of the event. They described the arrival of the intruders, the immediate, overwhelming force they brought to bear, and the calculated nature of the robbery itself. Each piece of evidence, the empty cash register, the position of the victims, and the trajectory of the bullets, serve as a brick in the foundation of the prosecution's argument. A central element of the trial was the testimony provided by the informants, individuals who had once been on the periphery or even participants in the gang's broader network. Their accounts provided the necessary psychological link between the criminal organization and the specific act of the execution. They testified to the culture of the gang, the insistence on absolute anonymity, and the severe, uncompromising consequences for any member who failed to uphold the code of silence. When they described the evening of the massacre, their voices were flat and often strained, as they recounted the conversations that had taken place before and after the event. They testified that the order to eliminate the witnesses had been issued not in a moment of panicked confusion, but as a deliberate, preventative strategy. This testimony was crucial in establishing the premeditated nature of the crime, elevating it from a secondary consequence of a robbery to an act of cold-blooded, intentional murder. The defense, conversely, focused their strategy on attacking the credibility of the evidence and the motivation behind the informant's testimonies. They argued that the investigation was fueled by a desire for a swift, high-profile conviction, suggesting that the pressure applied by the task force had coerced individuals into providing testimony that served the prosecution's narrative rather than the objective truth. They challenged the forensic interpretation of the crime scene, attempting to cast doubt on the exact sequence of the execution and the direct involvement of their specific clients. The cross-examinations were aggressive and exhaustive, aiming to fracture the consistency of the prosecution's case. However, the sheer density of the evidence, the convergence of forensic data, physical exhibits, and the corroborative statements from multiple independent sources proved to be a formidable barrier for the defense to overcome. As the trial entered its final stages, the focus shifted to the sentencing phase, where the full weight of the judicial system was brought to bear upon the convicted individuals. The courtroom had become a place of profound emotional resonance. During the impact statements, the families of the victims were given the opportunity to humanize the young men who had been lost. They spoke of their dreams, their work ethics, and the gaping, irrecoverable void that had been left in their absence. These statements served as a stark, humanizing counterpoint to the clinical, detached nature of the defendant's actions. The judge, presiding over the proceedings with a stern, impartial demeanor, listened to the argument from both sides regarding the gravity of the offenses. The prosecution pushed for the maximum possible sentences, emphasizing that the sheer depravity of executing defenseless individuals, combined with the gang's organized nature, necessitated a response that would ensure no further harm could be inflicted upon the community. The verdict, when it was finally delivered, was the culmination of an exhaustive and transparent process. The jury, having weighed the substantial body of evidence, returned with guilty findings on all primary counts of murder and armed robbery. The announcement brought a sense of finality to a chapter of history that had haunted Long Beach for months. The sentences handed down by the court were severe, reflecting the absolute judicial rejection of the violence that had been unleashed. The primary perpetrators were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a judgment that effectively removed them from society and underscored the extreme societal condemnation of their actions. This was not a symbolic gesture. It was a functional, permanent removal of those who had demonstrated an absolute disregard for human life. The aftermath of the trial was a period of collective processing for the community. The legal resolution of the case, while it provided a necessary sense of justice for the victims' families, could not undo the profound, irreversible damage that had been done. The trial had forced the city to confront a difficult reality. In the midst of their daily lives, in the quiet corners of their commercial districts, a level of violence existed that was entirely alien to the norms of civilized society. The conclusion of the legal proceedings served as a definitive moment of closure, yet the psychological resonance of the massacre remained a part of the city's identity. The media coverage of the trial, which had been intense, began to taper off as the public focus shifted, but the record of the case remained a testament to the importance of institutional integrity. The trial demonstrated that when the power of the state is applied with precision, collaboration, and a dedication to the truth, even the most clandestine and dangerous organizations can be brought to account. In the final assessment, the judicial resolution was a victory for the rule of law. It affirmed the state's duty to protect its citizens and its capacity to systematically investigate and punish those who operate outside the boundaries of societal morality. The process had been long and marked by a deep, persistent sadness, but it had achieved what it set out to do. The perpetrators were isolated, the evidence was documented, and the judicial system had provided a clear, public, and definitive end to their reign of terror. As the courtroom eventually emptied and the final documents were signed, the primary focus remained on the victims. The justice system had provided a measure of redress, but the true, enduring legacy of the trial was the acknowledgement of the lives that had been prematurely and senselessly taken. The courtroom had served its purpose as a forum for the truth, and the results stood as a clear, lasting assertion that such acts of cold-blooded, systematic violence would not be tolerated in the collective life of the city. The legal battle had been fought and won, and the responsibility of remembering the victims now shifted to the city at large, ensuring that the horror of that 1995 night remained a stark, cautionary lesson for the future. The chapter was now permanently closed, but the memory of the victims remained as a silent, enduring testament to the precious, fragile nature of life in an urban environment defined by the constant, encroaching pressures of the street. The judicial system had provided the ultimate, necessary closure, yet the quiet, persistent, and haunting nature of the case continued to ripple through the city's history, a constant reminder of the cost of violence and the necessary, unwavering commitment to justice that remains the foundation of a safe, orderly society. The trial stands as a monumental, singular case study in the power and the necessity of the law to act as a barrier against the deepest, darkest, and most dehumanizing expressions of human conflict, ensuring that the individuals behind the massacre would never again be in a position to cause such profound, permanent destruction. The aftermath of the Sons of Samoa Pizza Shop massacre was not marked by a sudden, celebratory return to normalcy, but rather by a slow, haunting evolution of the city's collective consciousness. The trial had provided a legal resolution, a structural end to the specific threat posed by those individuals. Yet the deeper, more unsettling questions raised by such an act of clinical depravity lingered long after the courtroom doors had been permanently bolted shut. For the residents of Long Beach, the massacre became a psychological benchmark, a moment that fundamentally altered the way they perceived the quiet, nocturnal corners of their own neighborhoods. The incident served as a chilling, inescapable reminder that the reach of organized street warfare was not confined to the visible, high-traffic corridors of the city, but could easily permeate the most ordinary, mundane environments of civilian life. It was a trauma that defied simple categorization. It was not just a robbery or a murder, but a profound violation of the unspoken social contract that allowed a community to function with a baseline expectation of safety. In the years that followed, the massacre became a foundational reference point for the city's law enforcement strategies. It demonstrated, with a terrifying clarity, the lethal potential of organized, immigrant-based syndicates that operated in the margins of the traditional, ethnically delineated gang hierarchy. The Long Beach Police Department and their federal counterpart have been forced to rethink their intelligence-gathering methodologies, moving toward a more nuanced, sociologically informed understanding of these organizations. They realized that to successfully disrupt such groups, one could not simply rely on brute force or aggressive patrol tactics. Instead, they had to cultivate deep, long-term relationships within these communities, breaking down the barriers of linguistic and cultural isolation that allowed these criminal entities to thrive in the dark. The investigation of the 1995 case became a curriculum of its own, a case study in how the persistence of a dedicated, multi-agency task force could systematically dismantle a structure that appeared, at its inception, to be an impenetrable wall of silence. For the families of the three victims, the passage of time brought no easy solace, only a quiet, stoic endurance. The loss of three young, promising lives to an act of such cold, premeditated insignificance was a wound that remained perpetually fresh. Their existence had been snuffed out for a handful of crumpled, insignificant bills, a realization that added an agonizing layer of absurdity to their mourning. The city, recognizing the profound weight of this tragedy, eventually moved toward more visible acts of communal remembrance, ensuring that the victims were not merely remembered as subjects of a sensationalized police file, but as individuals who had been an integral part of the fabric of their lives. These acts of remembrance, while modest, serve an essential function. They rehumanize the victims, pulling them out of the sterile, monochromatic imagery of the crime scene reports and restoring them to their true, living form. The legacy of the Sons of Samoa case also left an indelible mark on the broader national discourse surrounding true crime and the way society consumes stories of extreme violence. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of romanticizing criminal organizations, a narrative trap that some had fallen into during the high-stress, media-saturated era of the 1990s. The clinical, unglamorous, and deeply horrifying reality of the pizza shop executions stripped away any pretense of cinematic nobility that might have been attributed to street-level syndicates. The story served as a stark, sobering refutation of the idea that there was a code of honor, however warped, guiding the actions of these organizations. It presented the cold, hard fact that, when pressed, the instinct for self-preservation among criminal actors would invariably lead to the most dehumanizing, absolute solutions possible. In this sense, the case remains a vital, historical touchstone for anyone attempting to analyze the mechanics of modern crime, providing a clear, unflinching view of the consequences of absolute, unregulated power when it is wielded in the service of greed and self-interest. Reflecting on the psychological weight of the event, one must grapple with the sheer, unbearable stillness of that back room on the night of the murders. There's a profound, almost philosophical sadness in the realization that the final moments of these three young men were defined by a complete absence of audience and a complete absence of mercy. Their deaths were a private, industrial-scale liquidation, performed in a room meant for the storage of flour, in a building meant for the creation of simple, shared meals. The irony is as brutal as it is persistent. The city, in its efforts to move forward, has had to integrate this event into its history, balancing the need for public safety and justice with the necessity of acknowledging the permanent, scarring presence of such an event in the collective memory. It has resulted in a culture of vigilance that is tempered by a deep, lingering sorrow of recognition that the safety of a city is a delicate, hard-won commodity that requires the constant, active involvement of all its institutions and citizens. The broader implications for the immigrant communities of American Samoa, who found themselves unfairly associated with the violent actions of a small, predatory offshoot, were also complex and long-lasting. The struggle of these families, caught between their aspirations for a new life and the stigmatization resulting from the actions of a few, highlights the profound, unintended consequences of criminal subcultures. It reminds us that every act of violence has a ripple effect that extends far beyond the immediate victims and perpetrators, reaching into the lives of those who share their heritage, their history, and their identity. The task for the city of Long Beach and its diverse, evolving population has been to foster a sense of shared responsibility, one that rejects the destructive, self-isolating impulses of gang culture and promotes a more inclusive, communicative, and transparent way of living. It is a slow, difficult, and ongoing process, but one that is absolutely essential for the maintenance of a healthy, democratic society. As we look back at the 1995 pizza shop massacre from the vantage point of the present, the event stands as a grim, essential monument to the fragility of our daily routines. It reminds us that the mundane activities we perform, the work we do, the routes we take, the businesses we frequent, are lived within a context of social stability that is far more precarious than we typically acknowledge. The Sons of Samoa, in their brief, destructive surge, forced the city to face the reality that darkness is not something that exists only in distant, abstract locations, but is a potential that can erupt from the very shadows of our own streets. Is this realization that serves as the most lasting, cautionary lesson of the entire ordeal? The law, with all its procedures and institutional limitations, is our primary shield against this potential, and the success of the 1995 investigation remains a powerful, necessary proof of the efficacy of that shield. Ultimately, the story of the massacre is one of profound, irrecoverable loss contrasted against an absolute, unwavering commitment to justice. It is a story that requires us to be both empathetic and realistic, acknowledging the depth of the human capacity for cruelty while simultaneously celebrating the strength of our collective resolve to confront and neutralize it. The names of the 3 victims, though they might fade from the daily headlines, remain inscribed in the history of Long Beach as a silent, enduring protest against the senselessness of their end. The case continues to haunt, to instruct, and to serve as a reminder of the necessity of remaining vigilant in the face of forces that would seek to undermine our shared, precarious safety. It was a tragedy that did not have to happen, an atrocity that originated in the minds of men who had completely abandoned their humanity. Yet it was an event that forced the city to find and then define the limits of its own tolerance. The memory of the event remains a permanent, quiet ache in the city's heart, a lesson that can never be fully learned, only continuously lived, remembered, and honored in the ongoing, daily pursuit of a safer, more just, and more deeply human society. The resolution of the case did not close the book on the tragedy. It merely allowed the city to begin the long, slow, and necessary work of rebuilding, ensuring that the legacy of those 3 young men would be one of remembrance, of justice, and of a renewed, collective determination to defend the innocent from the encroaching, predatory dark that exists in the interstices of our common life. Their story remains, and must always remain, an essential, cautionary part of our history, a constant, silent warning of the immense, irreplaceable cost of violence, and the absolute necessity of the structures of law, order, and community that work every single day to prevent such darkness from ever finding a place in our bright, shared future. The final, enduring shadow cast by the Pizza Shop massacre is not merely the clinical documentation of the crime, but the profound, resonant silence that remains where 3 vibrant futures should have flourished. In the final estimation, the resolution of the legal proceedings served as an essential structural closure, yet it also acted as a gateway to a more complex, perpetual state of public reflection. The story of the Sons of Samoa in 1995 is a narrative that resists the neat, tidy boundaries of a concluded criminal case. Instead, it persists as a haunting, cautionary element within the history of Southern California, a permanent, cautionary marker that defines the boundaries between a functioning society and the encroaching void of absolute, senseless violence. The massacre effectively stripped away the illusions of safety that often permeate the lives of ordinary citizens, forcing a collective recognition that the structures of our daily existence are delicate, vulnerable entities that can be ruptured in a heartbeat by those who have chosen to exist outside the bounds of human morality. To revisit the events of that night is to engage with the essential, chilling vulnerability of the human condition. When we consider the victims, we're not looking at statistics or entries in a police file. We're looking at 3 young men who were, by every metric, the embodiment of potential. They were individuals working toward futures that were abruptly, violently silenced. The cruelty of their end, a clinical, mechanical execution performed in the name of anonymity, remains a stark, devastating indictment of the ideology of the organization that claimed their lives. The Sons of Samoa, by choosing to treat human beings as logistical liabilities to be discarded, demonstrated a degree of depravity that set them apart even within the brutal hierarchy of the mid-1990s ganglands. Their actions were a direct, violent rejection of the humanity of others, a decision that has permanently branded their organization with the mark of the most severe, unforgivable criminality. The institutional response to this crime remains a model of collaborative, persistent law enforcement, yet is also a reminder of the staggering, immense cost of such efforts. The scale of the investigation, the thousands of man-hours, the delicate, often precarious work of building cases against individuals bound by a culture of fear, and the logistical burden of the judicial process, all highlight the profound, exhausting labor required to maintain order in the face of absolute predatory disorder. The success of the prosecution was not a given. It was the result of a precise, relentless application of the rule of law, a process that demanded the highest level of professional dedication from those tasked with its execution. The detectives and prosecutors who navigated this case were not just performing a technical function. They were acting as the custodians of a fragile, communal standard of justice, ensuring that the horror of that night did not become the final, definitive reality for the families of the victims. As the years continue to accumulate, the massacre serves as a necessary, sobering lesson for the development of modern community safety strategies. It underscores the critical importance of horizontal, interagency communication and the necessity of building deep, trust-based relationships within neighborhoods that are historically overlooked or marginalized. The rise and eventual dismantling of the SOS network provided a blueprint for understanding the mechanics of immigrant-based street syndicates, a knowledge base that has since been utilized to prevent the formation of similar, highly insular, and predatory structures. The lesson, however, is one that must be continuously relearned, as the landscape of urban crime is constantly in flux, shaped by new social pressures, technological advancements, and the ongoing, difficult task of fostering inclusion and opportunity within our most diverse and underserved populations. The emotional resonance of the case also serves as a testament to the resilience of the families who were left in the wake of such profound loss. Their commitment to witnessing the process, their refusal to allow the victims to be forgotten, and their eventual ability to navigate the aftermath of their tragedy are the true, human core of this narrative. They transformed their private, devastating grief into a public, enduring demand for accountability, ensuring that the lives of their loved ones remain the focal point of the entire judicial proceeding. Their story is a reminder that the true strength of any community lies not in the machinery of its laws or the power of its institutions, but in the capacity of its people to bear witness to the truth, to honor the lives of the fallen, and to persevere in the face of the most unimaginable, life-altering darkness. Their presence was a constant, powerful reminder of the human cost of violence, a reality that no legal judgment could ever fully mitigate, yet one that was essential to the resolution of the case. Looking ahead, the history of Long Beach will always be permanently marked by this incident, a fact that the city has accepted with a quiet, persistent dignity. There is no desire to sanitize or hide the reality of what occurred. Rather, there is a commitment to ensuring that the tragedy remains a part of the city's broader, unfolding story. It acts as a permanent, silent check against the encroaching complacency that can arise during times of relative peace. The case of the Sons of Samoa remains a vital, historical touchstone, a warning against the potential for brutality that lies within the interstices of our common life, and a reminder of the necessity of remaining vigilant, engaged, and deeply invested in the safety and well-being of our neighbors. It is a lesson that is never fully completed, as the pursuit of a safe, inclusive, and equitable society is an ongoing, daily task that demands the active, informed participation of every citizen. In the final assessment, the story of the Pizza Shop Massacre is a profound reflection on the nature of our shared existence in the modern world. It is a narrative that moves from the mundane, quiet rhythms of labor and commerce into the heart of an abyss, only to return, through the collective, determined efforts of the law, to a point of definitive, historical resolution. The story demands of us that we acknowledge the depth of the darkness that can emerge from within our own communities, while simultaneously recognizing the strength of the light we can create when we choose to act in concert, with a shared commitment to the truth and a common dedication to the protection of the innocent. The names of the three victims, though they might not be known to the public at large today, are essential, permanent residents of the city's memory, a testament to the fact that every life, no matter how briefly it flickered, possesses an infinite, irrefutable value. As the narrative of this case fades into the broader annals of historical record, the essential takeaway remains constant. The fragility of our communal safety is a reality that we must acknowledge, honor, and defend with every tool at our disposal. The massacre was a tragic, inexcusable eruption of violence, but it was also a moment that tested the integrity of our institutions and the resilience of our people. The fact that the law prevailed that the perpetrators were brought to account, and that the city was able to move forward without abandoning its commitment to justice, is a testament to the strength of the values we hold in common. The tragedy remains an ache in the collective heart of Long Beach, a constant, silent reminder of the cost of violence, and the absolute necessity of the structures of order, community, and human empathy that remain the true foundation of a safe, orderly, and deeply humane society. We remember them not because it is easy, but because it is necessary, because the act of remembering is the first essential step in the prevention of future darkness and the final, enduring honor we can offer to those who were lost in the quiet, dusty silence of that unforgettable night. The story of those 3 young men is now a part of us all, a silent, cautionary, and deeply human presence that will continue to guide our collective commitment to a world where such horrors find no home. The final synthesis of this dark chapter in Southern California's history requires us to step back from the granular details of the investigation and the sterile, clinical mechanics of the courtroom to observe the broader, chilling architecture of what occurred. The Pizza Shop Massacre in 1995 was not an isolated aberration, but a profound, concentrated manifestation of an era defined by deep, structural fissures in urban society. It represents a point of intersection where the aspirational dreams of immigrant communities collided head-on with the predatory, nihilistic realities of the gangland epidemic. The Sons of Samoa, in their pursuit of absolute power and anonymity, effectively created a micro-reality where the traditional values of labor, respect, and communal survival were completely supplanted by a ruthless, Darwinian calculus. This realization serves as the final, haunting coda to our analysis. It compels us to understand that such atrocities do not emerge in a vacuum, but are the result of environments where the social fabric has been systematically frayed to the point of collapse. To understand the enduring weight of this case, one must appreciate the specific, crushing irony of the victims' final moments. These were young men who were, in every meaningful sense, the very antithesis of the violence that claimed them. They were building their lives, navigating the challenges of adulthood, and participating in the most mundane, essential processes of local commerce. They were the invisible workforce that keeps a city functioning, and their loss represents not just a personal tragedy for their families, but a collective loss of potential, integrity, and future contribution. The fact that their lives were terminated for a paltry sum of cash underscores the absolute, sickening triviality of the gang's motivation. It highlights a worldview that had become so detached from reality that human life was rendered secondary to the logistical convenience of an armed robbery. This, more than any other detail, serves as the most damning indictment of the gang's criminal ideology and a permanent, silent argument for the necessity of the law's most firm, uncompromising intervention. The legacy of the investigators and the legal professionals who dismantled the SOS network also demands a final, nuanced reflection. Their work was not merely an exercise in the application of statutes and evidentiary rules. It was an act of profound communal service. By refusing to let the massacre become another cold case, another unresolved tragedy lost to the passage of time and the complexities of urban anonymity, they reaffirmed the city's commitment to its most vulnerable members. They demonstrated that the reach of the law, when guided by persistence, intellectual rigor, and an unwavering moral compass, can penetrate even the most entrenched and deceptive of criminal infrastructures. The success of the prosecution remains a vital, historical validation of the judicial system, providing a necessary, visible assurance that the state's primary responsibility, the protection of its citizens from the most egregious forms of violence, remains a tangible, functional reality. As we look toward the future, the lessons of this case must be integrated into the ongoing, daily work of maintaining social health. The massacre serves as a constant, silent reminder that the absence of crime is not a passive state, but an active, hard-won achievement. It necessitates a constant vigilance, not in the form of fear or paranoia, but in the form of an informed, empathetic, and proactive engagement with the communities we share. We must be wary of the tendency to stigmatize entire populations based on the actions of the few, while simultaneously acknowledging the very real, very dangerous existence of criminal subcultures that operate within our midst. The challenge lies in building structures of inclusion that offer real, viable alternatives to the allure of gang participation, ensuring that the next generation of youth finds their potential expressed in the creative, productive building of their city rather than in its destruction. The story of the victims must also be preserved with a sense of dignity that transcends the sensationalist tropes of the true crime genre. It is too easy for such narratives to devolve into a focus on the mechanics of the violence or the notoriety of the perpetrators, thereby erasing the humanity of those who were lost. To counter this, we must ensure that the memory of these young men is continuously anchored in their lived experiences, their aspirations, and the love they were surrounded by. This is the ultimate, necessary act of resistance against the dehumanizing intentions of their killers. By keeping their memory focused on their humanity, we deny the perpetrators their final, ultimate goal of total, absolute erasure. We affirm that their lives held an infinite, irrefutable value, a value that continues to resonate long after the events of that night have been relegated to the archives of history. In considering the broader context of Southern California in the 1990s, we see a landscape that was simultaneously a site of profound innovation and profound destruction. The period was marked by the intense, rapid evolution of street culture, a development that outpaced the existing mechanisms of social and legal oversight. The massacre was a tragic, inevitable collision within this environment, a moment that forced a reckoning that was long overdue. The resulting changes in policing, in community engagement, and in the legal handling of complex, multi-agency investigations have since become the standard, the necessary, and the expected. The trauma of the past has been transformed into a foundation for a more prepared, more nuanced, and more collaborative approach to public safety. It is a transformation that has been paid for with the most precious, irreplaceable of currencies, and it is our collective duty to ensure that this cost is never forgotten. As we bring this account to a definitive close, we are reminded that the story is not a linear, neatly resolved narrative, but a complex, ongoing presence in our communal life. The massacre remains a permanent, quiet, and deeply human scar, a lesson that can never be fully learned, only continuously lived, remembered, and honored in the ongoing, daily pursuit of a safer, more just, and more deeply integrated society. The resolution of the legal case was merely the starting point for a process of reflection and reconstruction that must continue to involve every level of our society. The memory of the victims is not a static object to be filed away, but a living, breathing imperative that demands our continued attention, our empathy, and our unwavering commitment to the values of justice, order, and shared communal humanity. We have traveled through the darkness of that storage room. We have confronted the mechanics of the violence, and we have witnessed the power of the law to bring light into that void. The journey is one that has changed us, deepened our understanding of the fragility of our existence, and renewed our dedication to the creation of a world where such horrors find no home. The final, enduring takeaway remains the necessity of our continued, collective action in the service of the innocent, ensuring that the legacy of those three young men is one of hope, of resilience, and of a permanent, unshakable rejection of the forces that would seek to tear our world apart. Their memory will continue to act as a silent, powerful, and persistent guard, watching over the city, ensuring that the lessons of their loss are never allowed to fade, and that the promise of a safer, more humane future remains the guiding principle of all our communal efforts. The story is now ours to hold, ours to remember, and ours to use as we work every single day toward the construction of a reality that is finally, definitively, and forever worthy of the lives that were so senselessly taken. In the quiet, dusty silence of that unforgettable night, a part of our humanity was lost, but in the years of remembrance and the pursuit of justice that followed, we have reclaimed the essential, fragile understanding that our safety is a shared, communal achievement, and that the defense of that safety is the highest, most necessary duty of all. The final word, then, is not one of violence, but one of remembrance and, ultimately, one of an enduring, active commitment to the sanctity of the human life that remains the bedrock of all our communal future hopes. The final reflection on the 1995 Long Beach massacre necessitates an inward look at the societal structures that allow such darkness to take root in the persistent, unyielding light of justice that eventually exposes it. As we conclude this exhaustive exploration, we find ourselves at the intersection of tragedy and resolution, where the cold facts of the crime meet the enduring human necessity for meaning. The Sons of Samoa, in their calculated industrial-scale violence, attempted to impose a reality of absolute terror upon the city, a reality where the value of a life was measured in currency and the only law was the absolute, lethal authority of the trigger. Yet, in their failure to grasp the profound, inherent strength of a community bound by justice, they ultimately provided the very evidence required for their own permanent removal from society. This realization is the most significant, enduring truth of the entire ordeal, that no matter how organized, how ruthless, or how shielded a criminal entity may be, it cannot withstand the combined, unwavering focus of an informed public and a dedicated, persistent legal apparatus. The legacy of the 3 young victims, whose lives were so cruelly extinguished in the back of that windowless storage room, has evolved from a private, devastating loss into a permanent, public marker of the city's identity. Their memory is no longer confined to the sterile, monochromatic imagery of a criminal file, but has become a living, breathing component of Long Beach's historical consciousness. We must acknowledge that the true nature of their sacrifice is not in the violence they endured, but in the collective, societal awakening that occurred in its wake. The massacre acted as a catalyst, forcing the city to confront the presence of shadow-dwelling organizations that had been operating beneath the surface of everyday life. It initiated a period of rigorous, institutional self-examination that fundamentally altered the way Long Beach approached law enforcement, community safety, and the protection of its most vulnerable commercial spaces. This transformation, while born from the agony of the massacre, represents the most significant, tangible achievement of the years that followed. We must also consider the role of memory as a proactive tool in the prevention of future violence. To remember is not merely to look backward. It is to maintain a constant, informed state of awareness regarding the potential for such brutality to reappear in our midst. The story of the 1995 night is an essential, cautionary element in our contemporary understanding of the fragility of urban peace. It teaches us that the structures of order are not self-sustaining. They require the continuous, active, and informed participation of every single citizen. It demands that we be observant, that we be communicative, and that we remain deeply invested in the safety and well-being of the environments we inhabit. By keeping the lessons of this case at the forefront of our communal awareness, we create a climate of vigilance that acts as a natural, powerful deterrent against the encroachment of predatory, nihilistic subcultures. In this context, the role of the investigator, the unseen, persistent presence that weaves the narrative of the crime into the structure of justice, deserves a final, resonant acknowledgement. Their work in the 1995 case was a testament to the power of human intellect and moral commitment when faced with the absolute, dehumanizing indifference of criminal actors. The detectives, the federal agents, and the prosecutors who dedicated their careers to the resolution of this case were not simply performing a job. They were acting as the architects of a necessary, restorative process. They translated the chaos of the crime scene into the clear, undeniable language of the courtroom, ensuring that the perpetrators were not only identified, but were permanently isolated from the society they had so profoundly violated. Their dedication provides a lasting, essential lesson in the efficacy of the rule of law and the fundamental importance of holding individuals accountable for the choices they make. The broader implications for our social, communal life are clear. The creation of a truly safe and humane society requires us to be both inclusive and firm. We must continue to foster environments where opportunity is accessible to all, providing the necessary pathways for personal and professional growth that act as a fundamental, preventative measure against the allure of criminality. Simultaneously, we must remain absolutely, uncompromisingly firm in our rejection of any ideology that posits violence as an acceptable means of influence or survival. This dual approach, the nurturing of the communal potential and the robust defense of the communal safety, remains the only viable path toward a future where the horrors of the past are relegated to the archives of history, and the bright, shared reality of our daily lives is protected from the dark, predatory forces that would seek to tear it asunder. As we bring this account to its final, definitive conclusion, we do so with a heavy, yet hopeful, sense of purpose. We have confronted the darkness of the 1995 night. We have analyzed the structures of the violence, and we have witnessed the triumph of the law in the face of absolute, dehumanizing intent. We have honored the lives of the 3 young men, ensuring that their names and their potential remain the defining human center of this narrative. The story of the Pizza Shop Massacre is now a permanent, essential part of our shared, collective memory, a reminder of the fragility of our peace, the depth of our capacity for loss, and the immense, enduring power of our commitment to justice. It is a story that has changed us, a story that continues to instruct us, and a story that we must continue to carry forward as a testament to the resilience, the integrity, and the enduring, fundamental value of the human life that remains the bedrock of all our communal future hopes. The final, lasting takeaway of this account is the realization that justice is not merely an institutional product. It is a communal, living commitment. It is the result of the combined, daily efforts of individuals who refuse to be silenced, who refuse to ignore the darkness, and who refuse to accept the existence of violence as an inevitable, unchangeable reality. It is a commitment that we must continue to manifest in every single interaction, every single policy, and every single act of civic responsibility we undertake as we build the foundations of our shared future reality. The memory of the victims, the dedication of the investigators, and the resilience of the community remain as a silent, powerful, and persistent guard over our collective future. They remind us that the cost of violence is always, ultimately, paid by the innocent, and that the only true, lasting defense against such destruction is the active, informed, and unwavering pursuit of a world where justice is not just an ideal, but the absolute, functional baseline of our communal existence. We end not with a sense of closure, but with a sense of ongoing, persistent responsibility, a vow that the darkness of that 1995 night will continue to guide our efforts, our policies, and our collective, unwavering determination to protect the lives, the dreams, and the shared human potential of every individual who calls our city home. The account is finished, but the lesson remains as vibrant, as urgent, and as necessary today as it was in the days following the massacre, ensuring that the legacy of the fallen is one of continued progress, of justice, and of a permanent, unshakable refusal to allow the dark to ever again find a home in the quiet, bright corners of our shared human world. Their legacy is our responsibility, a torch of memory and resolve that we must continue to carry, ensuring that the light of justice remains the guiding principle of our progress, and that the lives of those we lost continue to shape the compassionate, orderly, and deeply committed society that we are, day by day, building together in their memory and for the benefit of all who walk our streets. In the final analysis of the 1995 Long Beach Massacre, we are confronted with the most profound realization of all, that the echoes of such a singular, devastating act do not simply fade into the annals of history, but are instead woven into the very fabric of the city's evolving consciousness. The journey we have taken through the chilling mechanics of the crime, the systematic dismantling of the Sons of Samoa's operational infrastructure, and the final, somber resolution of the judicial process has brought us to a place of both clarity and enduring complexity. We began by peering into the dark, desolate periphery of a city at war with itself, where a routine night shift was transformed in an instant into a site of absolute, dehumanizing finality. We navigated the stifling, powdery silence of the storage room, the clinical, cold-blooded efficiency of the execution, and the immense, institutional effort required to bring the architects of that nightmare to justice. This trajectory has not been one of mere documentation. It has been an exploration of the absolute boundaries of our shared human experience. To consider the legacy of the 3 young victims is to recognize that they exist now as a permanent, cautionary reminder of the immense, irreplaceable cost of societal fragmentation. Their lives, extinguished in the pursuit of an insignificant, petty sum of money, stand as a tragic, undeniable testament to the nihilistic vacuum created by organized gang violence. The Sons of Samoa, in their failed attempt to secure anonymity through mass murder, only succeeded in guaranteeing their own permanent exposure and disintegration. This paradox, that their extreme act of violence became the very instrument of their downfall, is the central, enduring lesson of this entire, painful narrative. It affirms that the institutions of justice, when fueled by the persistent, unyielding collective will of a community, possess an inherent, restorative power that can overcome even the most clandestine and predatory of criminal infrastructures. The institutional transformation that followed the massacre remains perhaps the most significant, positive outcome of the tragedy. Long Beach, forced to look into the abyss of its own internal instability, emerged with a more nuanced, collaborative, and strategically advanced approach to public safety. The city learned that the suppression of organized violence requires more than just patrol tactics. It demands a deep, structural investment in community trust, the linguistic and cultural integration of diverse populations, and a relentless, intelligence-driven focus on the hierarchies that sustain criminal syndicates. This evolution, while born in the heat of an unimaginable loss, has served as a vital, functional safeguard, ensuring that the conditions which allowed such an atrocity to occur have been fundamentally altered, challenged, and disrupted. The institutional memory of the case acts as a silent, vigilant monitor, continuously informing the city's responses to the ever-shifting landscape of urban crime. Reflecting on the psychological impact of the case, we must acknowledge the persistent ache that remains in the city's collective heart. The massacre was not just an event that happened to the families of the victims. It was a trauma that impacted the entire community, forcing a reevaluation of what it means to live, work, and exist within a shared urban space. The trial, while necessary and definitive, could never truly heal the wound left by the loss of 3 promising young men. Instead, it served to frame that loss within a broader, civic context, ensuring that the tragedy was recognized as a communal affront, a violation of the peace that every citizen has a right to expect. The act of remembrance, therefore, has become a vital, civic responsibility, an ongoing effort to keep the humanity of the victims at the center of the city's story, ensuring that they are honored as individuals rather than remembered as casualties. The role of the media and the broader true crime genre in the aftermath of the massacre also warrants a final, critical reflection. In an era where sensationalism often threatens to override the dignity of the dead, it is essential that we continue to demand a standard of reporting and reflection that prioritizes empathy, accuracy, and the human reality of the victims. The Sons of Samoa case serves as a powerful, necessary counterpoint to the romanticization of the criminal underworld. It presents an unvarnished, brutal, and profoundly unglamorous view of violence, demonstrating that there is no honor in the senseless execution of the innocent. By maintaining this focus, we ensure that the story remains a force for education and reflection rather than a mere, fleeting consumption of tragedy. We owe this standard of care not only to the victims and their families, but to the integrity of our own shared human understanding. As we look toward the future, The lessons of this case must remain a vibrant, active component of our communal consciousness. The prevention of such atrocities is not a static goal, but an ongoing, daily pursuit that requires the continued, active involvement of every citizen. It demands that we remain observant, that we remain empathetic, and that we never succumb to the complacency that can arise during times of relative peace. The story of the Pizza Shop Massacre is not a finished chapter that can be closed and set aside. It is a living, breathing imperative that guides our communal efforts, our policies, and our unwavering commitment to the safety and well-being of all who call our city home. It reminds us that the safety we enjoy is a fragile, communal achievement, one that must be continuously nurtured, defended, and upheld against the encroaching, predatory dark. The final, lasting takeaway of this account is the realization that justice is the absolute, foundational baseline of a functional, civilized society. The law, with its slow, methodical, and often agonizingly complex processes, remains the only truly viable shield against the forces of dehumanization and chaos. The success of the 1995 investigation stands as an undeniable, historic validation of this fact, a testament to the power of the rule of law to bring order to the most disordered of environments. This resolution, however, does not remove our individual, personal responsibility. We are all, in our daily lives, the custodians of our shared safety, the participants in the communal web of trust, and the witnesses to the ongoing, unfolding story of our city's progress. The legacy of the victims is thus an enduring call to action, a demand that we continue to build, defend, and cherish the values of justice, order, and human empathy. As we bring this comprehensive, final account to its conclusion, we do so with a profound, abiding sense of purpose. The darkness of that 1995 night has been confronted, the structures of the violence have been dismantled, and the triumph of the law has been recorded. The memory of the victims remains the beating, human heart of this narrative, an enduring, silent presence that continues to guide our efforts, our policies, and our collective, unwavering determination to protect the lives, the dreams, and the shared, human potential of every individual. We end not with a sense of closure, but with a sense of ongoing, persistent duty, a vow that the horror of the past will forever act as a guard over our communal future. The legacy of the fallen is one of continued progress, of justice, and of a permanent, unshakable refusal to allow the dark to ever again find a home in the bright, shared corners of our world. This is the final, true legacy of the Pizza Shop Massacre, that it became a catalyst for a city to redefine its boundaries of tolerance, to strengthen its mechanisms of justice, and to deepen its commitment to the inherent, irrefutable value of every human life. The story is now officially recorded, a permanent addition to our history, a constant, silent instructor in the vital necessity of our vigilance, and a testament to the resilient, enduring capacity of a community to rise from the depths of its own darkest moments. We continue, therefore, with a renewed, informed, and profoundly human dedication to the building of a future that is, in every way, worthy of the lives that were so senselessly, irrevocably lost. The memory is ours, the responsibility is ours, and the future, built upon the hard-won wisdom of our past, remains firmly and resolutely within our hands, dedicated to the protection of the innocent, the pursuit of the truth, and the unwavering defense of the peace that remains the bedrock of our communal human experience. The silence of the storage room has been replaced by the active, vibrant, and committed voice of a city that remembers, a city that acts, and a city that will forever stand as a vigilant guardian against the return of the dark, ensuring that the light of justice continues to shine, bright and unyielding, over the lives of all who call this place home, both now and for every generation yet to come. The final perspective on the tragic events of that night in 1995 requires us to synthesize the entirety of a narrative, moving beyond the immediate horror to understand the broader, transformative impact on the soul of Long Beach. When we look back at the conclusion of this dark chapter, we see that the resolution was not merely a matter of legal finality, but an essential step in a larger process of communal healing. The process of justice, as difficult and arduous as it was, served to validate the pain of the families, confirm the integrity of the law, and establish a historical record that ensures the events of that night will never be reduced to a mere forgotten footnote. The narrative of the Pizza Shop Massacre, in its totality, stands as a testament to the fact that while darkness has the capacity to manifest in the most sudden and devastating ways, the collective human capacity for justice, resilience, and memory possesses a far greater, more enduring power to respond, rebuild, and ultimately move forward. The enduring legacy of this case is found in the way the city of Long Beach shifted its paradigm regarding the unseen, systemic threats that exist within the margins of urban life. The massacre acted as a profound, albeit painful, teacher, forcing the integration of advanced investigative techniques with a more sensitive, community-oriented approach to public safety. The success of the joint task force between local law enforcement and federal agencies created a high-water mark for future operations, setting a standard for how complex, multifaceted criminal networks should be approached and dismantled. This legacy is not something that is celebrated, but it is deeply respected as a critical, hard-won lesson in the necessity of interagency cooperation and the absolute requirement for persistence in the face of criminal organizations that believe themselves to be above the reach of the law. The city's evolution in the wake of the massacre represents a fundamental, positive change in its ability to protect the everyday lives of its citizens, ensuring that the environment they inhabit is one defined by order and safety rather than the encroaching, nihilistic potential of gang-driven violence. We must also recognize the profound, quiet heroism of those who witnessed the process of justice from the beginning to the end. The families of the victims, who had to navigate the most agonizing of human experiences, provided a constant, moral anchor throughout the proceedings. Their presence in the courtroom and their public statements served as a persistent, human reminder that the victims were not merely subjects of an investigation, but were individuals whose lives had held a specific, irreplaceable promise. Their ability to survive the trauma of their loss, while simultaneously advocating for the truth, is a manifestation of resilience that transcends the capacity of simple language to describe. They remain the true, final authorities on the meaning of the tragedy, and their continued endurance is a testament to the strength that can be drawn from the pursuit of justice, even when that justice is the only partial compensation for a loss that can never be fully repaired. As we look at the present, from our vantage point in 2026, we see a world that is vastly different from the one in 1995, yet the essential human lessons of this massacre remain as relevant as ever. We are living in an era defined by rapid technological changes, new modes of global communication, and an increasingly interconnected, yet often fragmented, society. The challenges we face in maintaining our communal safety have shifted in form, yet the fundamental requirement, the necessity of an engaged, empathetic, and vigilant citizenry, remains unchanged. The lessons derived from the Sons of Samoa investigation provide a permanent, structural guide for our contemporary efforts. They remind us that the dangers we face, while they may evolve, always find their point of origin in the dehumanization of others and the breakdown of the shared, societal trust that allows a community to function. It is our responsibility, therefore, to ensure that the memory of the past continues to inform the wisdom of our present and the security of our collective future. The narrative of the Pizza Shop Massacre also serves as a crucial, reflective tool for the true crime genre itself, guiding its development toward a more ethical, humanity-centered perspective. By refusing to turn the tragedy into a piece of entertainment, by centering the narrative on the lives of the victims and the necessity of justice, we demonstrate that we understand the gravity of the stories we tell. This approach respects the dignity of the dead and provides a more meaningful, instructional experience for the living. It is a commitment to the truth that goes beyond the superficial, ensuring that the historical record remains a space for profound, social reflection rather than merely sensationalized reenactment of violence. We owe this rigor, this depth, and this empathy to all those who have been affected by such crimes, as it is the only way to ensure that their stories serve a purpose that aligns with the values of justice, peace, and human dignity that we strive to uphold in every aspect of our communal lives. In considering the ongoing, daily work of building a safer, more just society, we must acknowledge that there is no finish line. The maintenance of the peace is a persistent, iterative process that requires us to be constantly self-correcting, constantly learning, and constantly engaged in the labor of understanding our city's diverse, evolving needs. We are, each of us, a part of this labor, and the memory of the victims serves as an essential, motivating force in this work. Every interaction, every policy, and every act of kindness we perform contributes to the construction of a reality that is fundamentally different from the one that allowed the darkness to take root in that Long Beach storage room. We are, by our commitment to these values, ensuring that the legacy of those who were lost remains one of continued, collective progress toward a world where no individual is ever forced to face such a nightmare again. The final, lasting impact of this account is the realization that justice is not just a destination. It is a shared, communal journey. The resolution of the massacre was the result of a collective, sustained effort that involved the entirety of the community, from the witnesses who stepped forward to the detectives who chased the leads, to the jurors who weighed the evidence, and to the families who never wavered in their demand for the truth. This, ultimately, is the greatest proof of our shared human strength. When faced with the most absolute, dehumanizing expressions of conflict, we are capable of organizing ourselves in the defense of the innocent, of applying the principles of the law with absolute, unyielding precision, and of ensuring that the architects of destruction are held to account. The massacre was a moment of profound, irrecoverable loss, but the subsequent decades of resilience have been a testament to our capacity to transform that loss into a more resilient, informed, and dedicated communal identity. We bring this 10-part exploration to a final, definitive close, not with a sense of finality, but with a renewed, deep-seated sense of purpose. The history of the 1995 Long Beach massacre is now securely and permanently enshrined, serving as a silent, vigilant monitor that will guide our collective efforts for years to come. The names of the 3 young men remain the most important part of this entire historical record, a permanent human focus that will continue to anchor our efforts in the service of the innocent, the pursuit of the truth, and the defense of the peace. We carry the lessons of their loss forward. We hold the memory of their lives with respect, and we continue, day by day, in the construction of a future that is, in every single way, worthy of the immense, irreplaceable cost of their sacrifice. Our work as a community, as citizens, and as guardians of our shared, common humanity is ongoing, and it is a work that will be forever informed by the memory of that night, ensuring that the light of our shared commitment remains, as it always must, the final, absolute, an unshakable winner over the darkness that once attempted to dim the promise of our city's future. The silence is now filled with the voice of a community that understands, that remembers, and that continues to stand in defense of the sanctity of life, against all odds, and for the benefit of all who seek a future defined by justice, by safety, and by the enduring, unbreakable bonds of our shared, communal life, both now and for every generation that will ever walk these streets.